All right, so our next dynasty is the Tang Dynasty. Now, if you look, the start of the Tang Dynasty occurred in 618 CE, Common Era. And if you look back at the Han Dynasty ended in 220 CE. That means there was a period of about 400 years where we didn't have one kind of continuous dynasty or emperor. And so that was really due to those nomadic tribes that had invaded and kind of taken over, and all kind of the disunity within the empire at the end of the Han Dynasty. And so here at the beginning of the 6th century, that's where we start to see the dynasties start up again and kind of connect and rebuild. And so some significant things about the Tang Dynasty, the first being that we're starting to see China and their territory expand more into the central part of Asia. And so we can see how that is going to allow for China to take much more of the shape of what we think of when we think of modern China. So we can start to see how expansion and growth is going to allow for them to resemble much more of the current country of China. And with this growth and this expansion, the empire was really thriving due much in part to trade. Two major things that were occurring during that time that allowed for trade to be so plentiful was the Silk Road, which you heard about before in the Han Dynasty. That was still a major way of spreading inventions and products and ideas, so that was significant. And then the other being the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is the world's largest canal system that was built during the previous Sui dynasty, which was a short dynasty right before the Tang Dynasty. They had started to construct that, and then it was completed during the Tang Dynasty. So the Grand Canal allowed for, if you're looking at the map right there, it allowed for the two major rivers within China's geography, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, to be connected, which opened up so many possibilities for trade and moving goods through boats up and down both of those rivers. Here's a picture of part of the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal uses a lock system, just very similar to like the Panama Canal, where it's flooding some areas and allows for some areas to kind of rise in size with water and other areas to decrease. And so that allowed for a great amount of trade through the empire. So those were definite positives that occurred during this time. The next thing that occurred during this time, because they were so wealthy and financially successful, is they were allowed to kind of look into some other interesting inventions and ideas. So one of the major literary successes that occurred during this time was poetry. People started writing, more interesting, detailed poems and stories, and so we see the rise of poetry really kind of starting during this time and spreading throughout China. We also, during this time period, see many important inventions coming about, including gunpowder, which is going to be probably one of the most important inventions of all time, allowing for cannons and other, important weapons like the modern, pistol and guns and things like that. So that was very significant, as well as woodblock printing, which was large pieces of wood that they carved different characters on, and then you could ink it all in one large piece and use it to create books or other things using paper, which we talked about was an invention in the previous dynasty. So things like gunpowder were significant, as well as this woodblock printing technique. So both very significant innovations of this time period. The other important thing that occurred during this time is that because of the Silk Road and foreigners coming in and out of China, we were seeing religions like Christianity and Buddhism also coming into China. Now, Christianity, for the most part, was relatively well accepted within China, and there are still many regions of China today where we see larger Christian populations. And then the other religion that we're going to talk more about in our next unit was Buddhism. And this was a religion that came from India, and while Buddhism is oftentimes viewed as a philosophy more or less than a religion, Buddhism, what was significant about it was that they started to build very large Buddhist monasteries, especially within many of the outlying hills of China. And many people were kind of converting to this philosophy or faith. And this made many of the rulers very angry because they felt like these monasteries were becoming very large and wealthy and taking over a lot of land that could have potentially been farmland or other things. So many of the rulers started to ban these foreign religions, especially Buddhism, because of these types of things. So while we see some new religions coming in and innovations, as well as a lot of trade, there were some other interesting things going on, like this lack of religious tolerance.